Good afternoon. My name is Vivek Chilukuri. I lead the Technology and National Security Program here at the Center for New American Security. Thanks to everybody for joining us in person and online for a very exciting book launch for Dr. Anthony Vinci's new book, The Fourth Intelligence Revolution, The Future of Espionage and the Battle to Save America. So we're very fortunate to be joined by Dr. Vinci this afternoon for an important day. He spent a lot of time working on this book. We were talking about it backstage. I'll just introduce him briefly. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with his career and accomplishments and can read more about his bio on our website and on the event promotion page. But before we get started, Dr. Vinci is a senior adjunct fellow with the Tech and National Security Program here at CNAS. He was also, pertinent to this conversation, the Chief Technology Officer at the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency, say that 5 times fast, where he drove their efforts to partner with Silicon Valley to integrate modern technologies, including AI, and what I will say is probably an ongoing process to modernize that agency and the broader IC. Dr. Vinci is also the founder of a soon-to-be-launched company called Vico, which is going to be applying AI to super empower the judgment of decision makers to solve problems. So we can talk a little bit more about what that means later for those who are curious. And just to round it out, Dr. Vinci received his PhD in international relations at the London School of Economics and studied philosophy at Reed and Oxford University in the UK. So thank you for being here, Anthony, and thanks for doing your launch at CNAS. We're always grateful for your expertise on the team. But why don't we just start with just a nice opening question, which is, tell us a little bit more about your motivation to write this book. What gaps in the policy conversation did you see that you thought this book would be useful in filling?
Yeah, and thank you for having me. Thanks to CNS for having me, and long-term having me as a fellow. I appreciate it, and thanks for everyone for joining today. Thank you for coming. Well, look, the book really got its start in action. I was asked to come back into government as the associate director and then the chief technology officer at the NGA, and at that time, there was a feeling that technology was going to revolutionize intelligence, potentially. We didn't use that term, but we're starting to see these new technologies like artificial intelligence, commercial data, commercial satellites even, which, as you can imagine, for someone in the government was just, crazy pants. Like, oh, that was just not how this was done.
That was the official term.
That's a code word, yeah. And so I saw that kind of revolution happen in real time, and in some ways would like to consider myself an instigator of it. And when I left government, I really started to reflect on that revolution that I'd kind of gotten a front row seat to, and I realized that it was even bigger than just a technology revolution that was happening, and that the entire approach to intelligence was changing. The targets that intelligence was focused on were changing, the way that intelligence was going to be done, and most importantly, that intelligence was going to expand to include everyone, and not just the generals and the presidents and people in government who had traditionally been involved in intelligence. It was going to involve everyone, and including people who were in my family or even my son. And I wanted to tell that story. And I wanted to make people aware of what was going on, and that's really where the seed of the book came from.
Yeah, thanks for that, Anthony. And I mean, maybe some people will disagree, but everyone's talking about AI, not just in Washington, but in capitals all over the world, and corporate boardrooms all around the world. And in rooms like this, the conversation often focuses on the military applications of AI in respect to drones and autonomy, or we think about it, in the scientific domain. But I feel like there has been far too little conversation about the application of artificial intelligence to intelligence collection and intelligence analysis, which is ironic given the overlap of the core function. And I think in that way your book is very timely, and maybe it's a function of the IC not being as interested in opening up and talking about all of the challenges and opportunities of this technology. And I think one of the things you do a really great job of in the book is sort of opening the curtain a little bit and talking about the change in the IC over time, the opportunities, also the real challenges, and we can get into some of that in a second. So maybe just to help us set the scene a little bit, can this is the fourth intelligence revolution, right? Some people may say, okay, what are the, I didn't realize we were at the first, we were at four already. So maybe for those who aren't tracking the evolution of the IC as closely as you have been, can you just give us an overview of the first three briefly and why this fourth one is worthy of a book and its own moniker?
Absolutely. So if you back up, America always had some form of intelligence. In some people have even called George Washington America's first spy master. We were running sources during the Revolutionary War. So we've always had it with us. But for most of American history, intelligence was something that was just done in wartime. We didn't have a standing intelligence agency. We in fact, sort of socially and culturally felt like there was something, unethical about intelligence. We didn't want to have that. We thought of it as something that Europeans did, that was sort of distasteful. And so even up until World War II, America did not have a standing peacetime intelligence agency. The military services had some form, very small form of peacetime intelligence, but really we didn't have that. And so the first revolution that I refer to in the book was the formation of the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, which I call kind of the big bang of American intelligence, because it was the first time we had a modernized, true intelligence agency in the way we would think of it today, where it did operations, it did analysis, it did communications, it did R&D, all of these things that we associate with modern intelligence. And we learned to do that from the British, these sort of ungentlemanly kind of British MI6 intelligence officers. The second revolution happened after the war. And in fact, the OSS got shut down because reportedly, Harry Truman said that he didn't want America to have its own Gestapo. He didn't want there to be a peacetime agency. And so he shut down the OSS. But with the onset of the Cold War, we realized, look, we're going to need to do intelligence. And we were going up against what was then, and in many ways for the next several decades, one of the best intelligence agencies ever formed, what became called the KGB. And these were pros. I mean, these were professional intelligence officers and covert action officers in the KGB. So we had to form our own professional, peacetime, permanent, well-funded agencies. And so in 1947, we created the CIA, and then shortly after created other agencies like DIA and NSA and so forth. And we professionalized intelligence, and that was the second revolution. And that worked pretty well for years, but it actually in some ways kind of worked too well. And what happened in the lead up to 9/11 was that these agencies became so good at intelligence and compartmenting information and counterintelligence, we couldn't share intelligence with anyone anymore. And so the FBI and the CIA and other agencies literally were not sharing intelligence, and that's how Al-Qaeda slipped through the cracks and how 9/11 happened. And this is well reported in 9/11 Commission report. And so after that, we reflected as a nation and realized, look, we need to kind of change the system, transform the system, and that created what I call the third intelligence revolution, where we took this whole of government approach. We had CIA and FBI and Treasury and lots of other agencies working together, created what's called the intelligence community. And through each of these periods, we also, it was about the enemy, the adversary transforming intelligence, but also technology transforming it. We adopted satellites in the second intelligence revolution. We adopted and had to deal with cell phones and the internet in the third. Now we're heading into the fourth, and that's driven by a new adversary, which is China, which we can talk more about, and new technologies, and in particular AI. And those two factors are driving the fourth intelligence revolution.
Great. We can talk about China in a second, but let's actually spend a second talking about Russia, because you talk at length about it in the book, and specifically the information battleground that I think has been punctuated or underscored by the Russia-Ukraine war, or Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I should say, and that how the role of disinformation and information operations has become, I mean, it's been a part of warfare and conflict and geopolitics going back, probably to ancient times, almost certainly to ancient times, but has taken on a supercharged quality in the age of emerging technologies like AI and other things. I mean, but can you talk about how that development of the expanding information battleground has implicated us and what our role is given that?
Yeah. What's interesting about wars is sometimes you sort of see the future in them.
Yeah.
And some people have talked about the Spanish Civil War, which happened in the 1930s before World War II, as sort of a preview of what World War II would be like. And in some ways, I think Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, is kind of a preview of where these things are going. And that's kind of where I start the book. And I think a few things are previewed in this conflict. One, like you mentioned, is drones and autonomous warfare. And that is driving this one whole section of where intelligence is going, which is sort of autonomous intelligence driven by machines and sensors and so forth. But there's this other part, which is information warfare. We've always had that. During World War II, William Donovan, who is the head of OSS and its founder, went to Madison Avenue in New York and hired ad men, advertising people, like in the show Mad Men, literally those kinds of people, to come and act as propagandists to him, to perform propaganda against the Nazis and against the Japanese. And so we've always had that with us, but now this kind of work has been supercharged. And that began with the internet and social media, and we saw that in 2016 with Russian attempts at disinformation around the campaign. And that was, in its own way, a preview. But what's happened now is, and I talk a lot about this in the book, is that it's that on steroids, because there is not only so much information that can be provided as propaganda, and the Russians are very good at doing this, and China is very good at doing this, but now with artificial intelligence, you can change that information with a click of a button. So you always used to be able to change a photograph or something like this, and Mao would have this happen where they would literally erase someone from a photo and republish it and pretend that person was never in the photo. You could always do that, but it was difficult to do. Now with AI, literally anyone here, you and I could get on this iPad right now and go change and make up a completely new photo. And that's what's really new here. And the Russians are using this, and really lots of agencies around the world are using this to kind of change how propaganda and information operations work, and it's speeding up the whole system, making it so that you don't even know what to trust anymore. It's hard to even tell what's true or false, what's real or not, and they're using this in an integrated way with other forms of war in Ukraine.
And so for somebody who's not steeped in these issues, it can be easy to just sort of imagine that, okay, the Russians or the Chinese or others are using AI to push out propaganda, and it's with the intent of shaping policymakers. But one thing you sort of come back to over and over again in your book, which I appreciate, is the role of citizens and how this affects us, and not just us as passive consumers of all of this information, or hopefully not consumers of it, but our responsibility and the steps that we can take as citizens. I mean, can you say a little bit more about that? It's not, this is not just about the future of espionage, it's about the battle to save America and our role in navigating the fourth intelligence revolution. So in the context of this information contest that you've described, I mean, what is our responsibility? How do we actually interact with it? What does it mean for people who aren't national security practitioners at a day-to-day level?
This is the number one thing I wanted to really communicate in the book, which is that everyday Americans, in fact, everyday people around the world, are now becoming the targets of intelligence. And foreign intelligence agencies are collecting our information, for example. Every time you kind of turn on the TV and you hear about a quote-unquote Chinese hacker or Russian hacking group that stole healthcare data or stole financial information or broke into your local utility, these are attacks on us, individual people, regular people who have nothing to do with you know, the Washington, D.C. Beltway area. They don't work at the Pentagon. They don't work at CIA headquarters. It's somebody just living a normal life, but they're targeting them for collection of information, and they're targeting everyday people for the for information operations. They not only want to know information about you, but they want to use this to ultimately change your view of something. And that might be, like during 2016, to change maybe who you vote for, or to make you vote for no one, or to just create kind of disruption and societal kind of chaos where you don't know what to believe or to trust anyone in government or anything like this. They have various motivations, various operations, but the point is it's kind of targeted at all of us now. And that is very new. And it's new for intelligence agencies. And the hard part for an intelligence agency is they have to figure out, how do I protect everyone? First of all, they have to figure out that that's the problem, and I don't know that they have. I still think the majority of intelligence officers consider themselves as kind of serving the president or maybe serving a general and protecting quote-unquote secrets and stealing quote-unquote secrets. They don't necessarily think about protecting everyone in the way like a law enforcement officer might. So first they have to realize that that is the problem. But then how do they actually protect you? Well, that gets really hard in the world of information operations, because I think the last thing any of us want is the CIA censoring what information we're going to see. Even if it's terrible information, even if it's like literally traceable back to, you know, a Russian GRU covert action program, still, we probably don't want the government coming in and censoring that, right? That's just not American.
Well, and some people have argued the First Amendment protects our right to access foreign propaganda.
It's true.
Right.
It probably does. And so what do? Well, I think that we need to have everyone partially protect themselves and learn to be resilient and think like an intelligence officer. In some ways, become like a civilian intelligence officer, where you now begin to do the things that intelligence officers do, like look at information and be skeptical and triangulate it and be maybe a little bit paranoid about, hey, maybe there's a bad guy behind this. Maybe I should protect my information, or maybe I should be concerned. Not in a terrible way, but in the way that maybe we treat crime or cybersecurity, right? Like we all grow up and we're taught to, hey, be a little careful if you're in a bad neighborhood. Maybe put your wallet in your front pocket, or if you're parking your car at night, you know, don't leave your valuables out. Like this is normal. We all do this kind of thing. Or we're all taught from very young age now to do cybersecurity, right? You change your password. You don't click on phishing emails. So maybe we need to be taught and start to think about these adversary intelligence agencies in that kind of way and gain that resiliency. Work with the government. Think of it as like police and neighborhood watch, in a way, and then protect ourselves, including our children, who are also preyed upon in some of these instances by foreign intelligence agencies. And that, I think, is just prudent at this point and will make the nation safer and actually give us a feeling of control back in our lives, that like, yeah, these people are stealing our data, but I can do something about it.
Yeah, I think this idea of citizen intelligence officers or citizen spies, to be more provocative, is an interesting concept in this book. I guess a question also, I have abused my moderator prerogative and haven't let everybody know that we're going to have opportunity at the end of this discussion for about 15 or 20 minutes of audience questions if anybody has any, so it's not just me interrogating Anthony here. And also if there's folks watching online and they want to offer questions, they can also do that, and I can see them right here and ask them. So, but on this question of citizen intelligence officers, I mean, just to push back a little bit, I mean, how realistic is it? We can barely even get our act together with respect to cybersecurity at an individual level. We have an education system that can barely teach people the fundamentals that we want them to learn, let alone training them to be sort of amateur intelligence officers. I mean, what are some of the practical things that government or state and local governments, individuals and families can actually do to realize this ambition that you've laid out?
Yeah, I would think about it like this. We're not going to become, everyone isn't going to become James Bond. I don't think that's the point. Just like I'm not going to become a police officer if I want to protect my home. There are police officers for a reason, but I'm going to be prudent. So I think training is kind of the first step. Some basic training in how do you recognize propaganda and information operations, or how can I protect myself from information operations, or, and I'd put it like this, how do I think like an analyst? How do I think about triangulating information? If I see a news story on something, your average CIA analyst is not just going to believe that. They're going to go check some other sources. We can all do that. There's no magic to that. I see something on New York Times, let me check Fox. Let me check the South China Morning Sea Post. Let me check Newsmax. If I check all of those sources, they all say the same thing, that's probably true. If I check one, I don't know. So basic things like that. And will that immediately solve the problem? No. But just like will changing your password immediately solve the cybersecurity problem? No, but it will help. And I would think about it like, do you remember the club from the 90s, the like car protection device? It was like you blocked it on your steering wheel, and it was like very obvious. And if somebody broke into the car, you know, it would be hard. They couldn't steer the steering wheel, and harder to steal your car. It's not that the club was impenetrable. It's just that the club made it that much harder, slowed them down, and maybe they made them walk on to the next person and maybe try to rob their car. Well, can we do that, right? And then I think there is a space for people to take an even greater role. And one thing I talk about in the book is maybe we could form a civilian intelligence agency. And think about it as sort of like if you've ever heard of Bellingcat, which is a civilian journalist site where regular people just go out and they investigate things like the Libyan civil war or a Russian attack on something, and they publish it online. They're doing intelligence work. There's regular people at home who are interested in this. So there can be a role for people to do even more and really go after some of these threats if that's what you want to do, and we should help that happen. We should provide training and tools as a society, and they can go and do even more. So maybe you do the basic training stuff, but maybe you do something even more explicit, and that's how we can start to do and think like intelligence officers and do intelligence and protect ourselves and become more resilient.
Great. And one of the things you mentioned, you know, you talked about secrets earlier and how we might have a civilian intelligence agency. And one of the things that we're observing is that people are already using the proliferation of open source information to do their own investigations, for better or worse, right? But can you talk about how, just pivoting back to the IC and the intelligence community, how are they handling this proliferation of open source intelligence? What can you, one, give us a sense of what new categories of information are now becoming available that weren't available in previous intelligence revolutions? And two, how do you assess how our intelligence communities are actually meeting the moment when it comes to making use of this open source information?
My journey on the book really began with this issue, which was that for the history of the intelligence community, all of the satellite sources were government-owned, massive, very expensive, exquisite things. And around 2015, 2017, these commercial satellites came that anybody in the world could now access and get satellite information. And now there's all sorts of companies that do that. We can all just get on our phone right now and look at satellite information. Actually, it's become like normal now, right? You see it on Google Maps and things like this. Well, there's been a proliferation of that kind of data across the board. Cell phone information, other sensor information, geospatial information. And intelligence agencies are in the business of analyzing and assessing information to help people make better decisions. They realized this. So when I was at NGA, we tried to take that information in. We realized very quickly that it was overwhelming. There was just way too much information to actually assess. And so we had to create kind of new tools to do this, new approaches to do this, and get into what you say, open source intelligence collection and analysis. And the interesting thing, like I was saying before, is anybody can do this now. Within the intelligence agencies, they've always used open source. They always would, for example, even during World War II or the Cold War, they would go to a foreign nation and collect the phone book. They would collect newspapers. They would use this as part of, these were open source. They were available, but they would use it as part of the analysis process. Well, now there's just a lot of it, and the intelligence agencies have created means and organizations that just focus on that. Here's what I think is going to change. One is that I think that the open source information is so overwhelming, we need to use AI to assess all of it. I don't think there's a possible way we can have analysts work on that, and I think it should be done with that. And there are a lot of commercial companies now doing AI-based analytics that can serve that function. Two, I think that the agencies actually should work with regular people to do this. The Bellingcats of the world, maybe a civilian intelligence agency, they should work with the experts in these things, like, for example, economic analysts. The CIA or DIA or NSA is never going to have the best economic analysts. Hedge funds and banks and people like that are going to have the best. So they should work with those kinds of people outside of the intelligence community to help them do that. Third, and this kind of goes against everything I just said, the agency should actually start to look and use that open source intelligence, but in a level of moderation, in the sense that the adversaries caught on to this. They know that we're using this stuff now, so they're going to defend against it. They know when those commercial satellites are coming over, they're just going to hide their stuff. They know that, you know, we're maybe using this commercial analytical tool. They're going to try to hack it or change the information.
Or manipulate the open source data.
Exactly. So what we need to do within the IC is take what I would call kind of a barbell approach. Let's use that stuff. Let's use it at scale. Let's partner with it. But also, let's actually double down on the highly classified, exquisite stuff and take kind of this barbell approach.
Great. And, you know, I think it's easy to, for people who aren't following these issues, it's easy to underestimate the potential that the technology offers. Right? You're talking about, you write in the book, I think, really eloquently about how the issue historically has been, the issue number one for the intelligence community was acquiring information. And obviously, we still want to acquire certain kinds of information. Now, issue number one, in some ways, is how do we analyze all of the information that we have? And AI obviously has enormous potential there, as well as limits, which I want to come back to in a second. But you outline, and I think people here would be very interested to hear this, like a lot of very interesting hypothetical applications of AI for a modernized intelligence community in this fourth intelligence revolution. For example, you talk about how AI agents could potentially be modeling adversary thinking. Can you just say a little bit more about that and a few of the other examples, which I can remind you of here?
Yeah, I talk about how exactly that as you, and I believe that this is China's intent, in fact, because they're collecting all of this open source information, everything they can about our society, not just about the government and the military, literally everything, in order to model organizations, in order to model people. And then once you have models, what you can do is start to experiment. And you can run scenarios. What if we did this? What if we did that? That's a completely new world. It's not what intelligence has really traditionally done. And we're not very good at it, and we should learn to get better at it. Another thing I talk about in the book is that as we use more and more AI, I think this is inevitable. AI is going to do everything that intelligence officers do. It's going to collect information, it's going to analyze that information, it's going to disseminate that information to users. And it's going to start disseminating that information to other AI, right? So you're collecting information that gets sent directly to another drone.
It's AI all the way down, right?
It's AI all the way down. So one drone collects information. This is kind of happening in some ways in Ukraine, again, like that preview of the future, where one drone collects information, it feeds it to another drone, that drone then just goes and drops a bomb. Well, imagine that at scale. And the adversary is doing the same thing. So the adversary is using AI to collect information, analyze it, and disseminate it, and send it to their own AI. And now we're just having our AI collect information about their AI to combat their AI, and they're doing the same thing back to us. And so I talk about how intelligence becomes about AI spying on AI, and that's this inevitable future that we're about to see.
Yeah, that's kind of an alarming, potentially alarming future. But and it can feel, I mean, you write in the book about how AI can be super empowering to intelligence officers because it can help sift and prioritize and triage and allow them to sort of move up the analyst value chain so they're not doing low-level work. I mean, you talk about, I think, in the book about how, like, you worked at the NGA and 2/3 of the Earth is covered with clouds. And if analysts are physically going through all these satellite images and they're mostly cloud covered and there's not views, if you can just cut through all of that and focus on the 30% that actually has value, and then even then identifying which of those 30% have something that's worth paying attention to. Those use cases seem very obvious, but is there a counter argument to any of this? Like if we run this experiment over and over again where intelligence officers are just totally dependent on AI, and there's a world where people aren't used to AI and are now adopting it, but remember sort of the old ways of having to use their intuition and are drawing on a pre-AI set of experiences to inform how they're using the tool. What will happen when intelligence officers are born and bred and trained in a world where they've only used the tools? How do we make sure that they have that judgment, that they have that intuition, that they're not, you think about somebody who is using AI to edit now, but they remember what it's like to actually produce something in the first place. And in the future, maybe nobody has to write first drafts of anything anymore, and maybe there's some challenges there. I don't know. Can you take the other side of the argument? I mean, is there a world where AI actually disempowers the humans at the heart of the intelligence community? Because at the end of the day, that is what they are.
I think this really gets at a fundamental question for all of us in society today. AI is able to do more and more of what we as people have thought about ourselves doing. It does, you can get on ChatGPT and it can kind of do that first draft of an email now. It's doing more and more jobs, and it's going to continue to do so over the next several years. And the same thing is happening in intelligence. It's going to do more and more jobs. And so we're left with this question, what do people do? I think people are going to do very different jobs. I think that people will do things more, say, as an analyst, it'll be more about tasking the AI and coming up with a vision for what the AI should look into because you have a hunch or something. And then really becoming a partner with your customer in the way that, say, someone at the most senior levels in intelligence briefs the president now, or briefs a general, where they're a partner. They're anticipating what this person is interested in.
You talk about concierge intelligence
Concierge
services.
intelligence, exactly.
Yeah.
Or I talk about like fashion boutiques, which is something I got from my wife as an idea, but I think it's actually very relevant. Fashion boutique isn't about selling you clothes. You can buy clothes from anywhere. Fashion boutique is knowing what's important in the world, what's fashionable, what's important to you, how do you think, how do you like to dress. It's knowing those things. It's hard for AI to do that. This is what people can do if you have the time to do it. So I think that's where this kind of goes. But to your point, what's the downside? And I think the downside for intelligence and probably for society as a whole is we forget these skills, right? Like we forget, like you said, how to draft that email, or we forget how to do an intelligence analytical report. And as we go through generationally and people age out, you might literally not have anyone in the building who has done a certain thing anymore. And so what do you do then, and how much do you lose? Now, the reality is it's going to happen to the other side. So we're all going to be kind of stuck in the same mess, like China and Russia and us. We're all kind of going to be in the same situation. But so I do think there is a need to kind of continue to teach some of these skills, like how, for example, in the Navy, they still sometimes teach people, they took it off the curriculum, they put it back on, how to navigate with the stars. Even though that's something we did like hundreds of years ago, we're still sort of teaching it because, well, what if GPS went down? And we may have to do that in intelligence or in society in general, is still keep teaching these same skills so that we have at least part of our society that still remembers how to do this stuff.
Great. We're going to go to audience questions in a couple minutes. If you have any, please start thinking of them. But when you put all of this together, you're talking about a fundamental change, not just in the technologies that the IC is adopting and then using, but also how people are being trained, and also even how to think about the mandate and remit of the IC, right? You talk about how the IC didn't even really imagine or preview the ChatGPT moment that happened a few years ago, right? It was just a, this is a development in civilian technology with massive geopolitical implications that set off sort of a technological arms race and export controls, and that have affected the relationship of the U.S. and China at the highest levels, right? Xi and Trump are meeting later this week and are probably going to talk about AI chip export controls. So all of that's to say, this is a massive and fundamental change that the IC is going to have to take. And it's not just ours, it's Russia and China and the Five Eyes. I mean, do you think we're up to the moment? You're somebody who tried to drive technological transformation within the IC as a CTO at NGA. That's a lot of letters. But are we up to the moment? How do you assess the IC's ability to navigate this moment of transformation?
I do think we're up to the moment, and I think we're up to the moment because of the way our system works, where it is not centralized, it's not particularly top-down, hierarchical. There are hierarchies, but we as a country, we as organizations, we as an economy are very good at letting rebels in, right? Like there's Steve Jobs.
Well, they let you in, right?
Yeah. Yes, somehow that guy over there said, I'm going to hire this guy and bring him in because that's sort of what we do. Yeah. And we're pretty good at it. And so if anything, I think China and Russia and these much more top-down authoritarian states are at the bigger disadvantage. They're very good at moving resources. If they figure out what they want to do, they're great at that because it's hierarchical. But if something changes, something new happens, it's hard for them, and they can continue going down the wrong path. So I think the thing that we need to do right now is have more of these debates, have them publicly, and that's partially why I wrote the book. We have a great public debate about the military. Everybody has an opinion. There's a million think tanks that talk about it. We don't do that in intelligence.
But only one that talks about it really well.
Yeah, there we go.
No, I'm just
there
kidding.
We go. And we don't do that in intelligence enough, and so that's partially why I wrote it. And I think having that debate and inviting people from the outside into intelligence, which is hard to do because you need clearances and things like this. People don't even know they can go work there. It's so closed off. But we need to start letting these people in. We need to have these debates, and we need to let some rebels in. And we're probably going to make some mistakes when we do that. That's what happens. Things break. But like it's in that kind of creative destruction process that we're going to figure out the best way to do it. And that's what we did in the Cold War. It's what we did in World War II. It's in many ways what we did post 9/11, and I think we have to start doing that now.
Great. That's actually an excellent segue into a question we have online. But if folks in person have any questions, I think we have mics, or just throw your hand up and I can make sure we get to. But one of the things in this book and that this person's asking about is the role of the private sector. I mean, a fundamental change in this intelligence revolution. Of course, the private sector has always mattered for our intelligence collection and developing new technologies, but now the role has expanded far more than it has in the past, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that. And a question from Jessica is, would welcome insights about how the IC can best collaborate with the private sector to advance tech innovation efforts. And maybe just to take another lap on that, I mean, some of the most sophisticated capabilities are happening not within labs in the government, but in private sector labs with, that are not making products, at least initially, that are for the intelligence community. So how does the IC keep up with this, build partnerships that are constructive, and also, you've done a lot of work in Silicon Valley, like overcome issues of trust and collaboration?
Yeah. Backing up, when the third revolution happened and we went to this whole of government approach, we needed these other agencies to help. And I think what's happening now in this fourth revolution is we need a whole of society approach. The only way we're going to address these issues and these threats is to incorporate people, like we were talking about before, everyday citizens, but also companies and nonprofits and other organizations. Because the nature of the competition now involves all of society. The competition with China, for example, is not just a military or political or diplomatic competition, it's an economic competition. And they do that because they had to. It's hard for them to compete militarily with us. Our military is much larger than theirs and much better in many ways. So they used economic areas and commercial areas to compete with us. Well, if we're going to compete in an economic domain, the government can't do that alone. They literally don't need, most government officials have only worked in the government. They literally don't know how the economy works. You know, imagine your whole life is spent in government. You've never worked in a business one day. How are you supposed to effectively talk about and work with businesses? You can't. So we have to work with these businesses, and there has to be this sort of public-private partnership between companies, between the government. And we're starting to see that over the last several months, less so in intelligence, and I'm hoping that some of the decision makers in the intelligence world and the leaders right now will start to incorporate companies not just as places where I can buy technology, though that's important, but as places where we can partner, they can provide information. We can provide, the intelligence community can provide them threat information, because they're the targets sometimes. And so they need to get the information too.
Yeah, exactly. And you're right. It's not just that the IC needs to do a better job of tracking developments on the civilian side in terms of technology innovation so that they don't have another ChatGPT surprise. There needs to be far more. I know the National Security Agency has tried to strengthen some efforts with the AI companies to improve threat intelligence sharing, because these AI data centers, for example, that we're spending potentially trillions of dollars on in private capital have massive national security consequences and are being actively targeted, right? The model weights for these frontier AI models are the secret sauce for this entire AI revolution in many cases, and these are being protected by private companies with no real mandate to follow the best practices, just private sector incentives. And so if the IC isn't helping to share information about attacks and developing those sinews of cooperation, it leaves us very vulnerable. So you mentioned this sort of the role of the private sector, and this actually falls on well with a question from Daria, who talks about this surge of AI startups that are targeting the intelligence community. There are different categories that they work on: prediction models, analyst assistance, operations, optimization. What do you think, she asks, are most likely to survive long term, and what are the key differentiators that will separate the winners from losers in this partnership with the IC?
It's a great question, and I would think about it like this. Again, it's this sort of creative destruction process. I think the role of startups in many ways is to come up with new ideas, new technologies, and bring them out there into the world and see which ones work. And then we'll select down the ones that work versus the ones that don't work. And within intelligence, I would look at it from this framework. If you believe that every aspect of intelligence is going to be done by AI, because AI can in effect do many things, and over time I think almost all things that people do, I would systematically go through and say which of these things can be done by AI, or by AI doing them, remove the need to do it. And maybe that's contributing to it, or maybe that's doing the whole thing. So I think within analysis there's going to be a whole host of aspects. Intelligence is partially about prediction, but it's also knowing what's happening now or what happened before. It's partially about creating scenarios. It's partially about giving judgment and decision tools. So all of these things that people do. And so I think about it like this. AI is not a piece of software looking to replace a previous piece of software. It's a piece of software looking to replace some aspect of what a person did. And so I think about it as, okay, how do I analyze down what do people do? What are the steps that happen in these organizations and people's minds as they create an analytical report or do something else in intelligence? And where can I create a company, or where can a company do one of those aspects and then bring that in? And the importance, getting back to what you said, in doing that is it will make the IC better. It will make it do that thing faster or cheaper, right? Or just better than a person did it. And that's really the goal, is to better protect national security by doing things better than the adversary does them.
Great, thanks. Any questions from the audience? Want to open it up? Otherwise, I'll keep firing away. We had a few. Let's take the one in the back, and then we'll come up here. Just please introduce yourself. And
yeah, my name is Victor Atkins. I have a question about the clearances you mentioned. You said the this third revolution was driven in a lot of ways by trying to break down silos and compartments, and the D&I did a great job at that. If you were in the IC for those years, though, it actually created a lot of more compartmentalization in some ways, I think. It's just the nature of Intel to be to do that as part of tradecraft. But you're calling now for use of sources and analytics that are very open, whole societal involvement. So from an intelligence perspective, I guess, how do you address this clearance problem or the compartmentalization tradecraft, and how do you kind of maintain those things that are important about that while also, you know, getting to the future you're talking about?
Yeah, great question. Again, I would think about it in terms of this barbell, right? Can we do this really exquisite classified stuff very, very well and do this kind of open source stuff very, very well? And then can we adapt the clearance system for that? Because we do need clearances at this most exquisite level for the crown jewels kind of stuff. And the adversary is going to get better and better at collecting intelligence from us. So if anything, we need to get better at sort of protecting that by making stuff more and more secure over time. But at the same time, we need to figure out how to work with these people. The IC needs to figure out how to work with people who are maybe work in a company, who maybe don't want to have a clearance that restricts their travel or what they can publish or whatever. But we still need to trust them at some level. And so we may need to start to think about clearances differently, where there's a spectrum. And there's a spectrum not just based on the level of clearance. Right now, you know, you can have a secret clearance or a top secret clearance or something. But in like, what do you need to know, or what part of the equation do you take part in, or, you know, are you just doing this one thing and you have no access to everything else? And so start to think about a spectrum of security as it relates to clearances, where we can now incorporate people at some level of security, but like where we protect them from the downsides and, frankly, the length of time it takes to get a security clearance, which really slows us down. If it takes you a year to get a security clearance, that's a real bottleneck in, for example, industries like AI, where a year is like 2 generations of technology. You've already moved on from the need to even hire that guy anymore. Like the AI, you know, we need a different guy now. And so, again, I would just say we need both. We need highly secure, we need less secure, we need a spectrum, and that's probably the path forward.
Thanks. I think you had a question, right?
Yeah, my name's Sean Waterman. I'm a freelance reporter with Sean Waterman. I'm a freelance reporter with the Air and Space Forces magazine. I'm curious of this idea of a sort of citizen band of intelligence officers. There doesn't seem to be a sort of shared perception of the threat in American society right now. I mean, you know, you'd have some of these guys would be looking for Russians trying to influence, you know, the election, and some of them might be looking for authors writing transgender books. You know, I mean, there isn't a unified view of what the threat to America is. How would you reflect that?
Yeah, I mean, look, you've found like a great, you know, crack in the, and seam to mine in what I'm proposing, and I think it's a very legitimate question. I would say a few things about it, and I talk more about it in the book. One thing I would say is this. I'm okay with there being a spectrum of what people consider to be threats. And that's a good thing, because we don't necessarily know where the threats are going to come from. 2, I do think that we need to distinguish domestic and international. And when I imagine the threats that this, say, a civilian intelligence agency would do, or what people would focus on, we need to apply that to foreign adversary threats. So truly think like intelligence officers. And the difference between what I'm talking about and, say, Wikipedia or news or, you know, lots of these other things that you're sort of roughly referring to, is that this would be something focused specifically on bad guys. And by bad guys, I mean China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, people who are actively trying to harm us. But third, and you didn't say this, but I think it's implied, what if people started using some of these tools against all the other things, right? And you sort of mention, you know, trans people or something like this. That's a legitimate danger. And the thing is, it happens today. People do this today. People get doxxed today, right? And so I think part of that civilian intelligence thinking, part of that concept of having a civilian intelligence agency is that just like real intelligence officers, or professional intelligence officers, just like professional intelligence agencies, there are rules. There's an ethics around it. There's integrity and responsibility. Those pieces have to be taught too, right? That's part of it. Actually, the number one thing, a lot of people think you get recruited as an intelligence officer because you're like clever or sneaky or, you know, good liar or something. Actually, the number one thing is integrity. You cannot become an intelligence officer unless you have extremely high integrity. You just won't be hired. You'll be escorted out of the building first thing, right? So those kinds of ethics, those kinds of rules, those kinds of policies have to be built into the system as well. And when I say think like it's an intelligence officer, yes, I mean be clever and be tricky and collect information, but I also mean have integrity and realize what side you're on and who's on the side and what is the difference, where is, you know, what I believe as a private citizen and where is it about something where I'm trying to help my fellow member of a community or society.
Great. I think we have a question up here. And in the meantime, I would just say we do have a long way to go in terms of a shared threat perception when, despite all of the public warnings about TikTok, it still persists, and we have, what, 100 million people on it. But that's more of an observation than a question for us. But go ahead, please.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Sammy, and I also have a question about your concept of a civilian, being a civilian intel officer. So I am curious to get your opinion on an argument that I hear commonly used, like with the military, that the distinguishing factor with a civilian is that they have the luxury to enjoy peace and the privileges that come along with that. And a soldier is someone who bears the sacrifice and takes on the burden of concerning themselves with these threats and facing it head on. And so I'm interested in that, in translating it to an intel situation, and how, with your idea, how do we balance between empowering people to take, as you said, take their protection into their own hands and have that ability, in addition to understanding that we need a whole of society approach, while also allowing civilians in an ideal society, allowing them to not have to overly concern themselves with these matters and be overly burdened with these heavy, difficult topics and that sort of thing. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts of how do we strike the right balance with that?
Yeah, it's a great insight to think about. It's true. There is this sort of perception that military is taking the burden for America, but during wartime, it flips, right? And during World War II, which is the last time we fully mobilized as a society, everyone was involved. You know, I think around 10 million Americans wore a uniform during, and then that was when we had a population of maybe 100 million or 110 million. That is huge, huge proportion of Americans. And in the remaining people, many of them worked on or around military issues, building, you know, airplanes and munitions and things like that. And even those who were not doing that were contributing in some other way. Maybe there were feeding people, or they were had family members in the military. In a strange way, that's sort of what we're seeing now, and I don't know that I would go so far as to say we're like literally at a total war involving information operations and collection. I wouldn't necessarily go that far, but I think we're headed in that direction, where there are these attacks every day in the sense of data being stolen, information operations happening. I bet that literally right now, if we all turned on our phone and we kind of flipped through whatever your social media platform is, within 5 minutes, you probably see something that has some level of either influence operation in it or some stain of this on it, right? It's like happening all the time now.
There's probably some Russian or Chinese spyware on someone in this room's phone, right?
I think it's very, very possible. And so we are sort of in it a little bit, and so we do kind of have to take part in it. Now, at the same time, I hear what you're saying, and I'm not suggesting this at all. We shouldn't be walking around paranoid all the time. It's not that bad, right? Yet, and I hope it doesn't get that bad. But it, so it is this sort of moderation, just like you know, for many of us, kind of post 9/11, it's like, how did we strike that balance? Everybody got very, very nervous, you know, with terrorist attacks, but over time we sort of started to learn to live with it. And maybe we were a little bit more cautious when we went to a big public event for years, right? And it's like, were we paranoid and afraid? Maybe not, but we're a little more cautious. I think we need to kind of be there, is like a little more cautious, thinking about it, realizing this is a real thing, and being a little more resilient than we're used to being.
Great. Well, Anthony, we're coming up on time, so I'm going to use my moderator's prerogative to ask a two-part final question, which is, you know, we referenced China a few times, but we didn't actually talk very much about it. Maybe for part two of the fifth intelligence revolution. I'm just kidding. But
the sequel of the book really writes itself.
Exactly.
It's the fifth, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But you know, I think it's not news to anyone watching or in this room that China is engaged in a pretty comprehensive data collection and intelligence operations effort. Their digital Silk Road is expanding. They're also exporting a model of sort of technology-enabled authoritarian surveillance around the world that they've perfected at home. How do we, given everything you've described and what China is doing, how do we combat this without also, you know, sort of becoming the thing that we're trying to combat? You have this great quote from Nietzsche that I won't attempt to recite from memory, but essentially says something, you know, ye who fight monsters, be afraid that you don't become one yourself. So that's one part of the question is related to the second one, which is what is the message or two you want to leave with people that from this book that you think are the most important concluding thoughts?
Yeah, that Nietzsche quote, I kind of start the book because I think it's the most important thing to think about with intelligence, and it goes back to where we started, which is America has always been skeptical about intelligence. We don't like the idea of Gestapos. We don't want, you know, secret services patrolling. We don't want censorship. So, and I think that's a good thing, and we should never have it. And, you know, this is the essence of our society. China is the opposite. They are creating what I believe is a dystopian version of a surveillance and control society. And there is this sort of false debate where it's like, oh, well, the only way you can kind of combat something like that is to kind of become like it. And I don't think that's true. I think that we need to develop our own American way of intelligence is how I would think about it, where we can learn to use these technologies and still maintain, you know, our personal freedoms and responsibilities around them, but we have to be creative in how we do that. One of the ways that I think that is through this civilian intelligence officer concept, which I think is a different way to think about intelligence, but still protects you from some of these issues. And that's how we're going to have to start thinking about intelligence. Is the reality is the threats out there, the technologies are out there, surveillance is out there, all of these things are true. We have to adapt to them, but we can be creative of how we do that. And we should put first our rights and responsibilities and freedoms, and then figure out, that's just like, that's there, that's happening no matter what, then how do we work around that to do intelligence? And that's partially what I was trying to do in the book, and I hope that that debate continues. To answer your second part of your question, takeaways. I think if there is just one takeaway, it's that there are real threats from these adversaries. This is a real thing happening. And we don't have to be afraid of them. And by thinking of yourself as someone who can be like an intelligence officer, who can triangulate information, who can see through this lens of an intelligence officer and see what that bad guy is doing, and then protect yourself, I think that will lend confidence to people, and it will make us more resilient, and it will help to solve this problem, remove these threats. And you can do that on your own, just by taking a step back and thinking about where, you know, should I use this technology? Maybe I should research it before I use it. Can I triangulate this information? Can I be a little bit more cautious with these things before I post something on social media or share it? Just doing these simple things will help your community, it will help your family, it will help the nation, it will make you feel more confident, it will make you feel like you are part of the solution. And that's my hope in the book, and I know it's optimistic, but I do think that we can do it, and that would please me the most if people did that. And for that reason, I would hope that maybe not necessarily the CNAS people buy my book, because I think that, you know, we all kind of know this stuff, is that people who have maybe never ever read a book about espionage or intelligence will think about it and make this the first book they read, because I really wanted this to be something that showed everyone what's going on and gave these tools to people and these lenses to look at the world, because that's what's important to me.
Great. A great way to end this conversation, and thank you so much for your time, Anthony. Congratulations on this book. You know, one thing I appreciated about it is you don't just, there's a lot of sort of political science, current events books out there. You don't just admire the problem or describe a trend. You actually connect it to real people and offer specific ways that all of us can be involved and put both of our hands on this future instead of just watching it pass us by. So thanks again for your time. Thanks to everybody in the audience for being here. And if you want to ask him a question, if you didn't get a chance to, Anthony will be around to sign books. And rest assured, Anthony, at least I will buy a book as long as you sign it for me. But thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.